When Celeste Arsenault died after 61 years as keeper of the Point Cailloux Lighthouse on the Louisiana Gulf Coast, her family divided what she'd left behind in under a week. Her daughter Sylvie, Miriam's mother, took the house in Huma, the savings account, the jewelry, the car, and the furniture. Donna, Miriam's sister, took the remaining cash, the silver, and the sentimental items she'd spent 3 days selecting from boxes Miriam hadn't been allowed to open. What nobody took, what no one even argued over, was the lighthouse itself, a decommissioned Coast Guard structure on a spit of land 12 miles into the marsh, accessible only by water, its lamp dark since 1987, its iron stairs rusting, its lantern room cracked along one pane. The estate attorney had appraised it at zero, which was technically above what it was worth to anyone with options. Then the will was read, and Miriam discovered she had no other options. She'd been cut entirely from her mother's estate, every account and asset going to Donna, with a single exception at the bottom of the last page. The lighthouse, transferred to Miriam Arsenault Tate in fee simple, no conditions, no encumbrances. She'd come to clean it out and sell whatever could be salvaged. But when she climbed to the lamp room on the third morning and lifted the bronze housing plate from the floor of the lens mount, she found what her grandmother had been recording in the keeper's log for 40 years. Something the whole parish had been built on without knowing it. Something sealed beneath the lighthouse's eye, in a space that had been waiting for the one person Celeste had known, without meeting her, was exactly the right one to find it. The will reading was in the offices of an attorney named Boudreau, in a building on the main street of Huma that had a leaking ceiling tile in the waiting room and a secretary who wouldn't meet Miriam's eyes. Miriam had known, going in, that something was wrong. She'd known it the way you know things when you've been watching a family operate for 52 years and have developed an accurate read of the temperature in any room your mother or your sister occupied. The temperature in Boudreau's waiting room was the temperature of a thing already decided. Her mother had died 6 weeks earlier. Sylvie Tate had been 78, sharp until the last 2 years, and then not sharp in ways that Miriam had noticed and Donna had managed. Managed was the word. Donna had been managing their mother's affairs for 4 years, her accounts, her appointments, her medications, her visitors. Miriam had lived in New Orleans, an hour and a half away, and had driven down every second weekend, and she and her mother had talked on the phone every Thursday, and none of that had been enough to counterbalance whatever Donna had arranged in the day-to-day proximity of those 4 years. The estate was straightforward once Boudreau began reading. The house in Huma to Donna, the accounts to Donna, the car to Donna, the furniture and the silver to Donna. Miriam sat in the chair beside the window and listened to her name not being said for 4 pages, and then it was said once, at the bottom of page 5, in a subordinate clause attached to the distribution of what Boudreau called the Point Cailloux parcel, the lighthouse, and nothing else. Donna had not looked at her once during the reading. Raymie, her husband, had his hands folded on his knee with the particular stillness of a man who had practiced his expression in advance. Outside on the street afterward, Miriam sat in her car for 20 minutes. She'd come prepared for something like this. She hadn't been prepared for the complete cleanness of it, the surgical totality of being reduced to a lighthouse nobody wanted on a marsh 12 miles from the road. She drove to her sister's house. Donna answered the door and Miriam stood on the step and said, "Why?" Donna said, "Mama wanted it this way." Miriam said, "Mama didn't want this. Somebody did." Donna closed the door without raising her voice or changing her expression, and Miriam stood on the step for a moment and understood that she was not going to get anything from this conversation because there was nothing honest left in it. Whatever had happened in those 4 years, whatever arrangements had been made in the daily proximity of their mother's decline, Donna had decided on her story and was going to hold to it. Miriam drove back to New Orleans. She sat in her apartment and looked at the deed they'd mailed her from Boudreau's office. Point Cailloux Lighthouse, Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. Parcel assessed value, $0. She looked at the deed for a long time. Miriam was 52 years old and had spent most of her adult life doing work she believed in, and that did not make her rich. She'd been a community health worker for 20 years, out of a clinic in the Ninth Ward that ran on grants and the specific stubbornness of people who had decided the gap between what a neighborhood needed and what it had access to was a problem they were personally going to close. She owned a 2-bedroom apartment, a 12-year-old Honda, and a very good coffee maker, and she had not looked at that inventory as poverty because the work had been enough. Until Boudreaux's call, she would have said her family was also enough. Not close, she and Donna had always maintained the careful distance that forms in families where one child learns early that the other child is the preferred one, and adjusts. Miriam had adjusted. She'd made her life in New Orleans and called on Thursdays and driven down every second weekend, and she had believed, generously and perhaps wrongly, that her mother loved her even if the expression of it ran at a frequency only Miriam could hear. She was not going to spend the next 20 years in bitterness. She had learned in her 30s that bitterness was a use of energy that did not improve the thing that caused it. But she was going to feel it for an hour properly before she directed the energy elsewhere. She gave herself the hour. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table with the deed and the sealed log of her own reaction to it, and she felt what she felt until the feeling had a name, and the name was loss, and loss was not the same as defeat, and she knew the difference. Then she packed a bag and drove south into the marsh. The road to the launch point was 30 miles of 2-lane blacktop through sugarcane and bayou, the highway narrowing as it went, the live oaks draped with Spanish moss closing over the road in places like a tunnel. The marsh started at the end of the road, a flat open world of gray-green water and roseau cane, and the particular enormous sky that appears only at the edge of the Gulf. There was a boat launch and a dock, and a shed with a sign that said Fontenot Marine Services in letters that had been repainted recently enough to still be legible. A man was sitting on the dock with a coffee cup. 74, lean and brown from decades of Gulf sun, with white stubble, and the slow, economical movements of someone who had spent a lifetime working on water and had learned that hurry accomplished less than it cost. He looked up when Miriam walked down the dock. He looked at her, then at the bag on her shoulder, then at the deed in her hand. "You're Celeste's granddaughter," he said. "How did you know?" "Because Celeste told me you'd come eventually." He picked up his coffee cup. "I'm Gus Fontenot. I'll take you out to the lighthouse." The lighthouse was visible from 2 miles out, a white tower on a concrete foundation, the lamp room dark, the lantern pane cracked, the exterior paint peeling in long strips that had been coming off since before Miriam was born. The access platform was wood, several planks missing, the iron railing oxidized to a burnt orange. The door at the base of the tower was padlocked. Gus cut the engine and let the boat drift to the platform. "She was out here until 4 years ago," he said. "Then her health got bad and she had to come in." He looked at the lighthouse. She was the last keeper. Coast Guard decommissioned it in '87 when they automated the channel markers, but Celeste stayed on as caretaker. Said somebody had to keep an eye on it. Did she maintain it? After a fashion. She kept the interior dry, kept the log. He handed Miriam the dock rope. "That's the main thing she kept, the log." Miriam tied off the boat and tried the padlock. The key on the deed's key ring, a single brass key she'd nearly overlooked, fitted. The lock opened with a scrape and a click. Inside, the lighthouse smelled of salt and rust and damp concrete and something older, the particular smell of a place that has been inhabited for a long time by someone who cared about it. The iron stairs spiraled upward inside the tower, narrow, the treads worn smooth in the center where feet had landed for 100 years. The walls were white painted brick, the paint yellowed, with water lines at several heights showing where the surge had reached in past hurricanes. On the ground floor against the curved wall was a wooden shelf. On it, a brass oil lamp unlit, a tin of salt crackers sealed, a pair of rubber-soled work gloves dried and cracked, and a ceramic mug with a pelican painted on it, empty, sitting in the center of the shelf as if someone had set it down between uses and meant to come back. 3 things that had been left in place. Miriam held the pelican mug. It was her grandmother's. She'd seen it in the kitchen in Huma when she was small, before Celeste went back to the lighthouse. She hadn't known it had come with her. She climbed the stairs. The lamp room at the top of the tower was a glass octagon, one pane cracked from the upper left corner to the lower right, the crack sealed with silicone caulk that had yellowed and shrunk. The lens housing was a bronze ring set into the center of the floor, the rotating mechanism intact but still, the lamp itself removed when the Coast Guard decommissioned the light. The floor of the lamp room was painted gray, the paint worn in a path where the keeper had walked circles around the lens, watching the water. Miriam walked the path. She could see the Gulf from every window, west, south, east, the flat brown-green water of the shallow shelf, the shrimp boats in the distance, the pelicans riding the thermals above the channel. She looked at the bronze housing plate in the floor. It was a circular plate, maybe 2 feet across, set into the concrete with 4 bolts. The bolts were corroded but not frozen. Celeste had apparently kept them oiled. There was a film of grease at each head, dried but present. Miriam found a socket wrench in a tool roll attached to the wall below the stairs. She worked the 4 bolts out one at a time. The housing plate came up with the scraping sound of a seal broken. Beneath it was a cavity in the concrete floor, about the size of a shoebox, lined in oilskin. Inside the oilskin was a log, not the official keeper's log. That would have been turned in when the Coast Guard decommissioned the light. This was a private log, a composition book with a water-stained cover, thick with 40 years of pages, the binding soft from handling. Celeste's handwriting, small and precise, the kind of handwriting formed before convenience became the standard. It began in 1963. Miriam carried it down the stairs and sat on the lowest step and opened it. The first entry was not about weather or shipping or the state of the light. It was about a woman named Gaudry whose husband had left her with 4 children and a shrimp boat with a broken engine. Celeste had paid for the engine repair herself, through the Marine Co-op account, listed as a co-op maintenance expense, and had written it in the private log under the woman's name with a brief note. She needed the boat to feed her children. No one will ask questions. Done. The second entry, 2 weeks later, was about a family named Trosclair who had lost their catch to a net failure and needed seed money for the next season. Celeste had provided it. Done. Miriam turned pages. The entries went forward across 6 decades, the handwriting consistent, the format the same. Name, need, amount, method of disbursement, done. The amounts ranged from $30 in the early years to several thousand in the later ones. The method of disbursement was always through some structure that provided cover. The co-op maintenance account, the parish disaster fund, the church social committee, a neighbor who could be trusted to deliver without explaining. Celeste Arsenault had been running a covert assistance network from the Lighthouse for 40 years, and she had never once let the assistance arrive with her name on it. Miriam read for 2 hours, sitting on the iron step with the salt air coming through the cracked pane above her, and the light moving across the log's pages as the afternoon turned. The names were the names of the parish, the fishing families and the crab fishers and the families who lived on the back bayous and came into Point Calu for supplies and church. She recognized some of them. She had grown up with children from these families, gone to school with them, known their parents the way you know the furniture of a place. She had not known any of this. She thought about her grandmother, a woman she had loved without fully seeing, the way you love the people who have always been there completely and without examination. Celeste had been the lighthouse keeper. That was what she was. She'd been out on the point since before Miriam was born, tending the light and the log, and whatever she tended that Miriam had never known about. She turned to the last pages. The final entries were from 4 years ago when Celeste had come into Huma for the last time. The handwriting was larger, less precise, the pen pressing harder as if fighting a tremor, but the format was the same. The last entry was a single paragraph. I am coming in from the point. I have arranged what I can through Gus and the co-op. The rest will have to hold. I am putting this log under the housing plate where I have always kept it because that is where it belongs and where whoever is meant to find it will find it. I have thought for a long time about who that should be. Sylvie will not find it. Sylvie has never been to the lighthouse in her adult life. She would not climb the stairs. Donna will not find it. Donna would come to sell. She would not lift the housing plate. Miriam will find it. Miriam climbed the lighthouse with me the summer she was 9 years old and stood in the lamp room for 2 hours watching the boats. She asked me what the light was for, and I told her it was so ships could find their way home, and she said she thought it should stay on all the time then, and I told her it does when it matters. She is the one who will climb the stairs, and she is the one who will lift the plate, and she is the one who deserved to have what is under it. There is a second document. Read the log first, then look behind the false panel in the co-op office at the dock in Point Calu. Gus knows where it is. He has the key. The document is a deed supplement and an account instrument. The lighthouse, the parcel, and the co-op account belong to you, Miriam. I arranged it when I still could. Boudreaux doesn't know he drew up the will, not what was outside it. I kept the light as long as I could. Now you keep it. Your grandmother, Celeste. Miriam sat on the iron step. The light was going gold through the cracked pane, the late afternoon Gulf light, low and warm and thick with salt haze. She could hear the water against the foundation below and the wind in the roseau cane on the near bank, and in the distance the sound of Gus Fontenot's boat engine idling, waiting. She thought about being 9 years old in the lamp room, asking about the light. She thought about Celeste's answer. It does when it matters. She had not known at 9 that she was being read. That her grandmother was watching her stand in the lamp room for 2 hours and drawing a conclusion that would organize the next 40 years of an estate plan. She climbed back up to the lamp room and stood where she had stood at 9. The Gulf was still out there. The shrimp boats were still working the channel. The pelicans were still riding the thermals above the water. She held the log against her chest and looked at the water until the light changed. Then she climbed down and got back in Gus's boat. You found it, he said. He had known she would. She could hear it in the way he said it, not a question, not even a statement, more like a confirmation of something he'd been carrying for a while. She left a note about you, Miriam said. She left notes about everything, Gus said. He started the engine. She was a careful woman. The co-op office. She said there's a document behind a false panel. She said you have the key. Gus was quiet for a moment, steering the boat through the channel markers. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and produced a key on a piece of fishing line. He handed it to Miriam without looking at her. Been carrying that for 4 years, he said, since the day she came in from the point. The co-op office was a building at the Point Calu dock that had been serving the parish fishing fleet since 1971. It was a 1-story clapboard structure with a corrugated metal roof and a wooden floor that had been replaced twice and still groaned underfoot. Inside, a filing cabinet, a desk, a VHF radio, and a wall of cubbyholes for the co-op members' paperwork. The building smelled like rope and diesel and the particular brackish smell of a working waterfront. The false panel was behind the filing cabinet. Gus moved the cabinet himself without ceremony, revealing a section of wall paneling that had a recessed latch. The panel swung open. Behind it was a metal box. The key on the fishing line opened it. Inside, 3 documents and a letter sealed with Celeste's initialing wax, a habit she'd kept since before fountain pens went out of fashion. Miriam read the documents first. The first was a deed supplement, notarized and recorded at the Terrebonne Parish Clerk's office in 2019, conveying the lighthouse parcel in fee simple to Miriam Arsenault Tate, with explicit language stating that the conveyance was independent of and prior to any testamentary instrument. The parcel was already Miriam's. The will had been largely irrelevant to the lighthouse. Celeste had transferred it before she died. The second document was a co-op instrument, establishing the Arsenault Fund as a permanent operational account within the Point Calu Fishing Cooperative, with Miriam named as the managing trustee. The fund had a balance of $67,000, built over 40 years of Celeste's contributions and the interest they'd accrued. The fund's purpose was written in Celeste's hand on the facing page: ongoing community assistance, dispersed through the co-op, without attribution, for the maintenance of the parish's fishing families in times of need. The third document was a co-op membership certificate in Miriam's name. Miriam set the documents on the desk. Gus was standing in the doorway, looking at the water. He had the patience of a man who had been waiting for this moment for 4 years and was not going to rush the last few minutes of it. "Did you know about the fund?" Miriam asked. "I knew about everything," Gus said. "Celeste told me 20 years ago because she needed someone to keep the co-op running when she couldn't. I've been running the disbursements since she came in from the point." "How many families?" "In 40 years, 200 and some. In the last 4 years, maybe 40. He turned from the doorway. "This parish has been getting thinner since the oil spill and the storms. There are families working the water out there who would have stopped working the water without the fund. Some of them know they were helped. Most of them don't know where it came from." Miriam thought about the log. 200 families across 4 decades. The Gaudry woman and her 4 children and the broken engine. All those entries with "done" in the margin. She picked up the sealed letter. It was 6 pages in Celeste's small, precise hand, written on the same heavy paper she'd used for the log. Miriam read it at the desk while Gus sat on the dock outside with his coffee, watching the boats come in with the afternoon catch. "My Miriam, you are the only grandchild who ever climbed this tower with me. Your mother thought it was too far out, too hot, too much trouble. Donna came once when she was 12 and refused to climb the stairs because of a spider she saw in the second landing. You came at 9 and stood in the lamp room for 2 hours and wanted to know why the light didn't stay on all the time. I told you it stays on when it matters. What I meant was, you can't give everything at once. You give what the moment requires and you save what the next moment will need. That is what I have been trying to do for 60 years, first with the light and then with what I kept under it. I want to tell you why the log exists. I have been a lighthouse keeper my whole adult life. Not just of the light of the people the light served. The families who worked the water under this light were my community. They were not my responsibility in any legal sense, but they were mine in the sense that matters, which is the sense of proximity and care, and the particular knowledge that you can either watch things go to ruin or you can do something about it, and you have to choose. I chose. I chose early and I chose quietly because I understood something about these families. They would not accept help that came wearing the face of charity. They are proud people. They have been surviving the Gulf for generations through their own work and their own wit, and anything that suggested they could not continue to do so would damage the thing I was trying to protect. So I found ways to give that didn't look like giving. The co-op account, the parish fund, the neighbor who could be trusted. I gave until the structure of the giving was invisible, and then I gave some more. I want to tell you about your sister. I love Donna. I have always loved her. But I want you to know what happened because I think you may need to know it, and I think you already suspect. In 2014, Donna's restaurant in Huma was failing. She and Raimi had borrowed against the house and spent the loan, and the restaurant was still failing, and they were afraid to tell anyone because the pride of it would have been worse than losing the business. They came to me. I gave them what they needed, $64,000, drawn from my personal savings and a portion of the Lighthouse account, structured as an anonymous business grant through the Parish Economic Development Office. Donna does not know it came from me. She told your mother it was a government grant. She told your mother many things in those 4 years that were either partly true or were convenient. The restaurant survived. Donna's marriage survived. Donna's life continued as it had. I recorded the transaction in the log because I record everything. I am not telling you this to condemn your sister. She needed help and I gave it. That is what I do. But I am telling you because the will is going to exclude you, and I know it, because I know your mother and I know what 4 years of daily proximity and Donna's particular talent for arrangement can accomplish. And I want you to know that I knew. And I want you to know that what I have left for you in the Lighthouse and in the co-op is not a consolation prize for being excluded. It is what I always intended you to have. It is the more important thing. Donna has the house and the accounts. Those are the material things. You have the account and the log and the Lighthouse and the work. That is the whole thing. The Lighthouse is yours. It has been legally yours since 2019. No will can change that. If anyone tries to challenge it, the deed supplement recorded at the parish clerk's office is the answer to that challenge. The work is yours too, which means the obligations are yours. I don't say this to burden you. I say it because I think you will want the obligations. I think you have been wanting work that matters for a long time and haven't known where to find it. You have been finding it in small ways, I know this. Gus tells me things, but you haven't had a structure to work from. Here is the structure. The fund continues as long as it's funded, and as long as there is someone willing to run it with the necessary discretion. You don't have to run it for 60 years. You don't have to run it exactly as I ran it. You just have to keep it going long enough to find someone who will take it from you, the way I found you. Keep the light when it matters. Your grandmother, Celeste. Miriam folded the letter along its creases and put it back in the metal box with the documents. She sat for a moment at the co-op desk with the box in front of her. She was 52 years old. She had driven into the marsh with a deed to a broken lighthouse and spent 3 days climbing its rusted stairs and reading a log in the lamp room. She had found 60 years of her grandmother's private work sealed under a bronze housing plate. She sat with the box for a while. The water sounds came through the co-op office walls, the dock creaking, the channel moving, the occasional engine of a boat coming in with the afternoon catch. The smell of the working waterfront was everywhere, and she was learning to find it orienting rather than unfamiliar. She was learning the sounds and smells of this place the way you learn a language when you live inside it rather than studying it from a distance. She thought about the letter, about the phrase "Gus tells me things," and what that meant, that her grandmother had been watching her from the point, following her life from a lighthouse 12 miles into the marsh, through letters and phone calls and Gus's occasional reports, and had formed an opinion about who she was. Not just who she was in the comfortable sense, the warm family sense. Who she was in the specific sense of, what does this person need in order to do the thing I think she could do? She thought about the summer she was 9. She had stood in the lamp room for 2 hours watching the boats and asking questions, and Celeste had answered every one of them directly, without simplification, with the respect of someone who believed children deserved honest answers. She had remembered it for 43 years as the best conversation she'd ever had about purpose. She had not known, until now, that from Celeste's side it was also an assessment. She had also apparently been seen by her grandmother at age 9 in a way that had organized the next 43 years of a plan. She thought about Donna, about the $64,000 and the parish economic development grant, and the 4 years of daily proximity and the things said, and arranged while Miriam drove down every second weekend and called on Thursdays. She was not angry, or she was, partly, in the way that was honest to acknowledge even if it wasn't the thing that mattered most. Underneath the anger was something cleaner, a kind of clarity that came from knowing what had happened and why, and finding that the why was not as dark as the what had suggested. Donna had needed help and Celeste had given it, the way Celeste gave everyone help. The fact that Donna's receipt of that help had come back around to cost Miriam something was not the point of the story, even if it was the occasion for this room, this box, this conversation she was having with a dead woman through 40 pages of careful cursive. Donna had needed help and Celeste had given it. Miriam had apparently been seen. The lighthouse was exactly where it was supposed to be. That was the shape of it. Right now she had a log with 40 years of entries and a co-op fund with $67,000, and a lighthouse with a cracked pane and rusted stairs, and a lamp room where her grandmother had walked circles for 4 decades keeping an eye on the parish. She had work to do. She went back to the dock and found Gus sitting on the dock cleat the same way she'd found him that first morning, coffee cup in hand, watching the channel. She sat beside him and said, "Tell me about her." Gus was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet before things without hurry gathering. "I knew Celeste for 40 years, he said. "I started shrimping this parish when I was 22 and the lighthouse was the first landmark I learned. She was always there. Early mornings when we went out, she'd be up in the lamp room drinking coffee and watching the boats. She'd wave. Every boat, every morning. After the light was decommissioned, she was still there. She said somebody had to keep an eye on things. Did you know about the log from the beginning? I knew about the fund from about 1985. I found out the way most people found out things about Celeste, by accident and then by being trusted." He turned the cup in his hands. She was distributing through the co-op maintenance account, and I was co-op treasurer, and I noticed entries I hadn't authorized. When I asked her about it, she told me the whole of it. He looked at the water. She said she'd been waiting for someone to notice for 15 years, and she was glad it was me. Why you? Because my grandmother is in the log, he said. 1969. She lost her husband to a shrimping accident, and the bank was going to take her boat. Celeste paid the note, sent it through the church social committee. My grandmother fished that boat for another 11 years and raised 3 children. He picked up his cup. When Celeste told me about the fund, she told me about my grandmother at the same time. She said, I want you to know where your family's boat came from, and I want you to help me make sure it keeps going. Miriam sat with that. How many people know? She asked. About the fund specifically, me and now you. About Celeste in general, that she was the kind of person who helped most of the parish has suspected for years. She was the lighthouse keeper. People came to the lighthouse when they needed something, and somehow the something got handled. Nobody named it out loud because naming it would have made it official, and official would have changed it. He set his cup down. She understood that. She kept it loose on purpose. She wrote down everything. I know. She showed me the log once years ago, said it was the record in case something needed to be proven. I asked her what she expected would need proving. She said she didn't know. But she kept the record anyway. He looked at Miriam directly. Now it's been proven. Turns out she was right to keep it. They sat on the dock while the afternoon boats came in with their catch, the shrimp boats low in the water and the gulls working the wake of each one. The smell of the Gulf was everywhere, salt and diesel, and the particular alive smell of working water. The lighthouse was visible in the distance, white against the brown-gold sky, and Miriam could see the cracked pane from here, a dark line across the upper left corner of the lantern room. She was going to fix that first. Come to the co-op meeting Thursday, Gus said. I'll introduce you. What Miriam did not expect in the 10 days between finding the log and the threat letter was how much she came to understand about the parish in that window. The co-op meeting on Thursday had 17 members present, the working core of the Point Calu fleet. Gus introduced her simply. Celeste Arsenault's granddaughter, here to continue the fund. The room was quiet for a moment in the particular way of people who have been receiving something without knowing its source, and who are now being shown the source. Then a woman named Gautreau asked about the dock at Bayou Pool. Then a man named Chauvin asked about the co-op's insurance renewal that had been delayed for 3 months. Then the meeting moved into the practical work of a working co-op, and Miriam took notes and asked questions, and did not pretend to understand what she didn't yet understand. After the meeting, 3 people found her separately. A man whose daughter was in the hospital with a preterm baby and whose shrimping days were going to be missed. A woman whose boat motor was making a sound that wasn't right and whose usual mechanic had moved to Baton Rouge. An older man who said nothing specifically but looked at her for a long time and then said, Your grandmother talked about you. She said you'd have good judgment. I hope she was right. Then he walked to his truck. She went back to the lighthouse that evening. She climbed the stairs in the dark with her flashlight and stood in the lamp room and looked at the Gulf. The channel markers were on, green and red in the black water, marking the safe passage. The shrimp boats were out, their running lights moving slowly through the dark. The lighthouse was dark. It had been dark since 1987, but the brass oil lamp was burning on the shelf below the stairs, and its light came up through the iron grating of each landing, small and warm and steady. She stood in the lamp room and thought about her grandmother walking this circle for decades, and she thought, it was always this. Not the official light, the other light, the kind that doesn't show up on navigation charts. She had work to do. She climbed back down and drove back to her rental in Point Calu and was sitting at the kitchen table with the log open when the certified mail notification appeared on her phone. What Miriam did not expect was that the letter would arrive so quickly. It came the next Tuesday, forwarded from her New Orleans address. The letter asserted that the lighthouse parcel had been improperly excluded from the estate inventory and requested that Miriam consent to an independent appraisal and possible redistribution. It cited the appraised value of 0 and argued, with the particular creativity of an attorney who has been asked to argue something thin, that the zero appraisal itself suggested the parcel had been overlooked rather than intentionally excluded. Miriam read it twice. Then she called a property attorney in Huma named Save, who came recommended by Gus through the same network by which most useful things in the parish arrived. Save was a brisk woman in her 60s who wore her reading glasses on a cord and read the letter in 4 minutes. "The deed supplement recorded in 2019 ends this before it starts," she said. "The property was conveyed to you prior to the death of the decedent. It was never part of the estate. Cannot be redistributed because it was never available to be distributed." Then why did Boudreaux include it in the will at all? Because Boudreaux didn't know about the 2019 recording, Savoy said. He drew up the will and someone told him the lighthouse was Celeste's to give, and he included it. That doesn't change the legal reality. She set the letter on her desk. What it does tell us is that someone, probably Donna or Ramey, has been talking to someone at the parish clerk's office. Miriam thought about Ramey's folded hands at the will reading, the practiced stillness. Can they challenge the 2019 deed supplement? They can try, Save said. They could argue undue influence, lack of capacity, improper execution. None of it will hold if the supplement was properly notarized and recorded, which it was. She looked at Miriam over the reading glasses. They're not trying to win. They're trying to cost you time and money until you settle. I'm not settling. Then I'll file a motion to confirm title, Save said, and we'll take it to a hearing. She filed the motion that Friday. Donna's attorney responded the following week with a filing that added a new argument, that the co-op account Miriam had been named trustee of was a marital asset of Celeste's estate, improperly transferred outside the will. Savy read the new filing and shook her head. The co-op account is not a personal asset. It's a trust instrument within the co-op structure. The co-op is a legal entity separate from Celeste's estate. They can't touch it. She paused. But they know something about the account. Someone has been talking. Miriam thought about who might know about the fund. The co-op members who had been receiving disbursements. Gus. The parish economic development office where the 2014 grant had been processed. Donna. If Celeste had recorded the 2014 payment in the log, and if Donna had ever, in 4 years of managing her mother's affairs, found the log, she stopped that thought. Gus had confirmed the log had not been found, but the 2014 payment had gone through the parish economic development office, and parish records were public, and Donna and Ramey had their ways of following threads. They knew about the fund. They didn't know the extent of it. They didn't know the log. But they knew enough to challenge the co-op trustee designation, which meant they would try to reach into the fund, which meant the $67,000 that Celeste had built over 40 years of careful work was potentially in play. Miriam called Save. Save listened to the analysis without interruption. Then she said, "The fund is safe. I told you the co-op is a separate legal entity, but you're right that the 2014 payment creates a complication." She paused. If Donna argues that Celeste made a significant transfer to her outside the estate, which the 2014 grant effectively was, she can try to argue that Celeste was in the habit of making transfers to family members without estate consideration, and that the 2019 Lighthouse deed should be treated the same way. "That's backwards," Miriam said. "It is backwards, but it's a legal argument. It's thin." Save was quiet for a moment. "Here's what it means for us. We cannot introduce the 2014 entry into evidence proactively, because introducing it confirms that a significant transfer was made to Donna, and Donna's attorney will argue it creates a pattern. But the log says Donna doesn't know where the 2014 money came from. Donna not knowing and the court not knowing are different things." Save paused. "We don't introduce the 2014 entry unless they force our hand. We rely on the deed supplement, the chain of title, and the final entry's explicit statement of testamentary intent. That's enough to win." Another pause. "Unless they have something we don't know about. What would that look like? I don't know yet, but Ramey is not an unintelligent man, and he's had 6 weeks since the will reading to prepare." Miriam sat with that. She called Gus. "The log," she said. "Was it always under the housing plate?" "Always," Gus said. "Celeste put it there in 1963 and it never came out until you found it." "Did Donna ever go out to the lighthouse?" A pause. Once, Gus said. About 3 years ago, she hired someone to boat her out, said she was assessing the property. Did she go up the stairs? I don't know, I wasn't there, but I can tell you this, she was out there for maybe 40 minutes and she came back with nothing. He paused. If she'd found the log, she wouldn't have included the lighthouse in the will challenge. She'd have found another way. Miriam thought about that. If Donna didn't know what was in the log, she was challenging the lighthouse on the assumption that it had hidden value, the co-op connection, the fund she'd traced through the parish economic development office. She didn't know the log contained the record of her own rescue. She didn't know Celeste had written it all down. She didn't know that the tool she most feared was the one she'd never thought to look for. Miriam went back to the lighthouse that evening. She climbed the stairs and sat in the lamp room with the log in her lap and read the 2014 entry again. The $64,000. The restaurant. The grant that Donna had told their mother was from the government. She thought about Celeste writing this entry. 67 years old, sitting in the lamp room with her precise hand moving across the page, recording the things she'd done for her own daughter's daughter and noting, without anger, the way Donna had wrapped the receipt in a lie. I am not telling you this to condemn your sister, the letter had said. She needed help and I gave it. Miriam looked at the gulf through the whole pane, the one that wasn't cracked. The October moon was rising above the water, yellow-white and enormous above the flat horizon. She thought. Celeste gave Donna what she needed to survive and Donna took it and converted it into an instrument of control over their mother, and eventually into an instrument of exclusion against Miriam. And Celeste had known this would happen and had given the money anyway and written it down anyway and built the alternative anyway. That was either the most patient act of love she'd ever encountered, or it was the most deliberate act of reckoning, arranged across decades, by a woman who understood exactly what she was doing and trusted that whoever found the log would understand it too. Maybe it was both. She put the log back under the housing plate and bolted the plate and climbed down and drove home to Point Calu. The mid-story setback arrived 4 days before the hearing. Ramey, not Donna Ramey, had filed a supplemental declaration asserting that the lighthouse parcel had been the site of commercial co-op operations during Celeste's tenancy, and that any commercial use of the property during a period when Celeste was paying no rent to the estate created an implied financial interest for the estate. Sava called Miriam the morning it was filed. It's a reach, she said. But it's going to require a response, and it means I need the co-op's financial records for the year Celeste was in residence. Gus had those records. He came to Sava's office the next morning with 4 file boxes. Save went through them in 2 hours. She found what she needed. The co-op had a formal lease instrument with the Coast Guard dating back to 1991, in which the co-op paid the Coast Guard a nominal annual fee for use of the dock and associated structures. The lease had been assigned to the parish when the Coast Guard transferred the property, and the payments had continued. There were 41 years of payment records in Gus's boxes in neat annual folders. Celeste hadn't been using the lighthouse for free. She'd been paying for it through the co-op since before some of the current co-op members were born. Ramey didn't know about the lease, Save said. She almost smiled. He filed a supplemental declaration based on an assumption, and the assumption is wrong. She stacked the folders. That is the last thing they have. Stay with me because what Celeste recorded in that log changes everything that comes after this. If this story is landing with you, subscribe before we get to the end. The hearing was on a Friday morning in Huma, in the Terrebonne Parish Courthouse, a building that smelled of old paper and the particular institutional patience of every courthouse in Louisiana. Save was efficient and dressed for it. Miriam sat beside her and watched Donna across the room, and Donna sat beside Ramey and did not look at her. The gallery was not large, but it was not empty. Gus was there, in his good flannel shirt. 3 co-op members had come, including the man named Trosclair who had driven an hour. 2 women Miriam recognized from the Thursday meeting were in the back row. The man who had told her he hoped she had good judgment was there in the corner with his cap in his hands. Miriam hadn't asked anyone to come. They had come because Gus had mentioned the hearing and the way Gus mentioned things, without asking, as information, in the confident expectation that the right people would make the right decision. Donna's attorney opened with the estate argument. He was competent and working with what he had, which was not much. Savoy let him finish. Then she presented the 2019 deed supplement and its parish recording, the notarization, and the chain of title showing clear conveyance prior to the decedent's death. She presented the co-op instrument showing the Arsenault Fund as a co-op trust account, legally separate from Celeste's personal estate. She presented the co-op lease records, 41 years of nominal annual payments, confirming that the commercial use of the lighthouse had been authorized and compensated. She presented a letter from the parish clerk confirming the recording date. Then she asked permission to enter a portion of the keeper's log into evidence, specifically as documentation of the testamentary intent and the history of the property. Donna's attorney objected. The judge heard the objection and overruled it. Savoy read the final entry of the log. All of it, including the passage about Miriam at 9 years old in the lamp room, and the passage about Sylvie, and the passage about Donna. She read slowly. The log entry had been written for exactly this kind of reading, the handwriting large and deliberate, the sentences short and clear, the kind of prose that carries weight because it was written by someone who had learned to waste nothing. She read, "I recorded the transaction in the log because I record everything." She read, "The will is going to exclude you and I know it." She read, "What I have left for you in the lighthouse and in the co-op is not a consolation prize for being excluded. It is what I always intended you to have. It is the more important thing." And then she read the last paragraph. "Keep the light when it matters." The gallery was very quiet. Gus looked at his hands. The Trosclair man was looking at the wall with the expression of someone fitting pieces together into a shape he had been half-forming for years. One of the women from the co-op meeting had her hands pressed together in her lap. The man from the Thursday meeting who had hoped she had good judgment had his eyes closed. Miriam sat at the table and did not move. She was looking at the space above the judge's bench, at the state seal on the wall, at nothing in particular. She was thinking about her grandmother in the lamp room, 40 years of mornings, the coffee cup on the shelf, the pelican mug, the circles walked around the lens. She was thinking about being 9 years old and not knowing she was being read, that a woman was watching her and deciding something important about what would happen when she was gone. She had spent 2 weeks in the marsh, and she had found the log and the letter and the documents, and she had understood the structure of what Celeste had built. But it was different, hearing it read aloud in a courtroom. It became official in a way it hadn't been when she was alone in the lamp room. It became real in the way things become real when they enter the formal record. Donna's attorney did not object during the reading. That, in its own way, was also a form of evidence. When Savoy finished, the attorney asked for a brief recess. The judge granted 10 minutes. During the recess, Raimi leaned close to the attorney and the attorney made one phone call and then Savoy was beside Miriam. "They're withdrawing," Savoy said quietly. "All claims." Miriam looked at her sister. Donna was sitting very still at the table across the room, her hands flat on the surface in front of her, looking at the wood grain. Raimi had leaned slightly away from her, as if giving her space for something that needed space. He had not expected the 2014 entry. She could see that in the posture, the recalibration of a man who had been running a calculation that turned out to be missing a significant variable. Donna had known about the grant. She had apparently told herself it was from the government, or she had stopped asking questions once the money arrived, the way people stop asking questions when the answer might cost them something. She had not known Celeste had recorded it. She had not known her mother had watched her take that money and arrange it, and use the proximity it bought to arrange the will, and had written it all down in careful, pressing cursive in a log under a housing plate in the lamp room of a lighthouse Donna had visited once and not bothered to climb. Donna was looking at the table. She was 56 years old and she was looking at something her mother had seen and recorded and left for whoever would eventually need to know it. Miriam sat with that. She was not going to feel triumphant about this. She had known herself well enough for 52 years to know that triumphant was not in her register. What she felt was something quieter and stranger, a kind of grief for the version of the family they had not been, which was adjacent to gratitude for the version of it that had persisted anyway, in the lamp room and the log and the bronze housing plate and 60 years of entries in the done column. The judge returned. The withdrawal was entered. Title confirmed. Donna did not look at her on the way out. Outside the courthouse, the September air was still hot and thick with the Gulf humidity that didn't break in Louisiana until October. Gus was on the courthouse steps when Miriam came out. "Coffee," he said. They walked to a diner on the main street. Gus drank his coffee the way he did everything, slowly, without hurry, watching the street through the window. "What happens now?" Miriam said. "Now you go back to the lighthouse and fix the pane," he said. "And then you fix the stairs. And then you come to the co-op meeting and you start learning the names. That's all. That's all of the first part," he said. He picked up his cup. "There are a lot of names." 3 months later, the cracked pane in the lantern room had been replaced by a glazier from Huma who had done it for half price when he found out whose granddaughter was asking. The iron stairs had been cleaned and treated and repainted by a young man from the parish who was building a contracting business, and who Miriam had found through the co-op meeting Gus had taken her to. She'd paid him fairly and put his card in the co-op filing cabinet where the referrals lived. The platform at the base of the lighthouse had been replanked. 3 men from the fishing cooperative had shown up on a Saturday in October with lumber and tools and worked for 8 hours without being asked. Miriam had provided coffee and gumbo from the diner in Point Calu that Gus had told her about, the one run by a woman named Claudette who had grown up on the bayou, and cooked the way women cooked who had been feeding working people for 40 years, plentifully and without ceremony. Miriam had sat on the platform railing watching the men work and asked Gus quietly why they'd come. "Their families are in the log," he said. "Word got around that Celeste's granddaughter found the lighthouse. People wanted to see what kind of person she was. You fed them gumbo and didn't get in their way. That was the answer. She hadn't turned the light on. The lighthouse was decommissioned, and there was no mechanism to recommission it, and the channel markers handled the navigation now. But she'd replaced the bulb in the brass oil lamp on the ground floor shelf, the one in the relic trio below the stairs, between the sealed tin of crackers and the rubber-soled gloves, and she kept it burning when she was in the lighthouse, which was most weekends now. The Pelican mug held her coffee. She'd cleaned it and kept it in the same spot on the shelf, because some things should stay where they were left. Gus came by most mornings in his boat, tying up at the platform and coming inside for coffee and the report on what the parish needed that week. He had the accumulated knowledge of 40 years standing alongside Celeste's work, and he was transferring it to Miriam the way you transfer a trade, in the specific, practical order in which it would be needed, not in a rush, not all at once, the way water moves through a system designed for the purpose. The first co-op meeting she attended, in late September, had been her real introduction to the parish. 21 members, men and women who worked the water, ranging from 40 to 75, with the weathered, self-contained look of people who had been managing hard conditions for a long time and had stopped expecting external solutions. Gus had introduced her as Celeste's granddaughter. Several people had looked at her with the particular measuring gaze of people deciding whether someone is real. Miriam had said she was planning to continue the fund and maintain the co-op and asked what they needed. The room had gone very quiet. Then a woman named Gautreau had said, "The dock at Bayou Pool needs repairs before winter and nobody has the materials." Miriam had written it down. She'd had the materials delivered by the following Thursday. She had made 27 entries in the log by November. Her own entries in her own hand below Celeste's 60 years. The same format, name, need, amount, method, done. She did not always have money to offer. Sometimes the answer was a referral, a contractor who owed the co-op a favor, a social worker at the parish office she'd met through her own clinic connections, a neighbor who knew how to navigate the insurance process for a claim that had been sitting unresolved for 8 months. Miriam was a community health worker. She knew how systems worked and how they failed and which lever to use for which kind of stuck. That knowledge, applied to the parish, turned out to be worth more some weeks than the fund balance. She called her clinic in New Orleans and asked for a leave of absence. They gave her 3 months. She thought she might need more. One Thursday in October, a young woman came to the dock at Point Calu while Miriam was in the co-op office doing the month's disbursement ledger. 24, with a child on her hip and an expression Miriam recognized, the careful, controlled expression of someone who has something difficult to ask and is not sure how it will be received. Her name was Paloma. She'd been working on her family's shrimp boat since she was 16, and the boat had engine trouble she couldn't afford to fix, and the season was running out. Miriam looked at her. She looked at the child on her hip. She thought about the log entry for the Gaudry woman in 1963, the broken engine, the 4 children. She took Paloma's information and told her to come back Thursday. On Thursday, she had arranged for the engine repair through the co-op maintenance account, listed as fleet maintenance, no attribution. Paloma came back with the documentation. She looked at the repair order and looked at Miriam. "Who paid for this?" she asked. "The co-op has a maintenance fund," Miriam said. "It's what it's for." Paloma looked at her with the direct gaze of someone who does not fully believe the explanation but understands it is the explanation she is going to get, and that there is a kindness in the way it is offered that is itself part of what is being given. "Thank you," she said. "Come back when you need something," Miriam said. "Or when someone you know needs something. That's how this works." Paloma nodded and walked back to her boat. Miriam watched her cross the dock and cast off and go. She was 24 with a child on her hip and a working boat and a season left and a name that was now in the log. Then she went back to the co-op office and opened the log. She wrote the entry. Paloma's name, the engine, the amount, the method. In the done column, a single line. She sat for a moment with the log open in front of her, the afternoon Gulf light coming through the office window and falling across the page. Celeste's 60 years of entries above. Her own below, accumulating slowly in a different hand but the same columns, the same intent, the same fundamental belief that the work was worth recording even if the record never left this office. She thought about what it meant to keep a record that nobody would read. She had asked Gus about this once, during one of his morning visits to the Lighthouse. He'd looked at the water for a moment and then said, "Celeste kept the record so that she would know whether it mattered, not so the town would know. So she would know. It was accountability to herself. The record was the way she held herself to the standard she'd set. Miriam understood that. She had spent 20 years in community health work and she had kept records, case files, intake forms, outcome tracking, but those were institutional records, required by funders and regulators. They were not the same as sitting down each evening and writing, "This is what I did today and this is why. This is the person I helped and this is what they needed and here is how I know it was done." She was learning to do that. She had 29 entries in the log now, and she read them back sometimes in the evenings, the way Celeste must have read the older entries, not for nostalgia, but for calibration, to see whether the work was going where it was meant to go. Gus had been teaching her the names, not all at once in the practical order they were needed. He knew which families were underwater in January, and which ones held up until March, and which ones had been through enough hard seasons to know how to ask, and which ones would never ask until you found a way to make the help invisible. He knew the history, who had been helped by the fund, and when, and how the help had moved through the parish in the years since, which debts of gratitude had become acts of generosity in their own right. He could trace the line from Celeste's 1969 loan on his grandmother's shrimping boat through 30 years of his own involvement in the co-op to the Thursday meeting where Miriam had asked what was needed and the room had answered. That was the thing about the record, she thought. The record didn't just show what had been done. It showed the chain, the way each act of help enabled something else. The way the Gaudry woman's boat in 1963 had fed children who grew up to fish the same water. The way the Trosclair family's seed money had grown into a co-op membership. The way Gus's grandmother's boat note had become 40 years of Gus carrying the work forward. The record was the proof that it compounded. That it was worth doing not just for the immediate return, but for the long return, the kind you couldn't see from where you were standing. She closed the log and put it in the metal box and locked it in the wall panel behind the filing cabinet. Then she walked out to the dock and stood in the late afternoon light and looked at the lighthouse on the horizon, white against the brown gold sky, the lamp dark, the window whole now, the tower standing where it had stood for 100 years above the marsh. She thought about the oil lamp burning on the shelf downstairs, the small brass lamp between the tin of crackers and the rubber gloves on the ground floor shelf. She had gotten in the habit of lighting it whenever she arrived, before she climbed the stairs or opened the log or did any other work. It was the first thing. The light, however small, before anything else. Celeste had kept a lamp like that. Miriam had found the evidence in the lamp room, the oil tin, the glass chimney, the careful record in the log of storms weathered and lights maintained. Her grandmother had understood that the official light, the one the charts showed, was one kind of marking, and that there was another kind, quieter, less visible, doing its work without showing up on any official record, that was in some ways the more important one. She had been doing the second kind for 60 years. From this point of land at the edge of the Gulf, now Miriam would do it too. Not in the same way. She did not have 60 years, and the parish had changed and the needs had changed, and she was a community health worker with a different toolkit than a lighthouse keeper had carried. But the intent was the same. The record was the same. The lamp was the same. Her grandmother had kept the light as long as she could. Miriam would keep what mattered after that. What a lighthouse keeps is not just ships from the rocks. It keeps the knowledge that someone is watching, that the dark stretch of water between here and wherever you are going has been attended to, that the dangerous places have been marked by someone who thought the marking was worth the effort of a life. Celeste Arsenault put her light where it was needed for 60 years and kept the record of it under the lens, and what she left was not money or property or instructions. What she left was the proof that attention, given steadily over a long time, is a form of love. And love, given that way, does not end when the person does. It just finds a new keeper, and the keeper lights the lamp, and the lamp burns on the shelf, and the shelf holds the pelican mug, and the mug waits as it always